Well, hi everyone. I'm John Ritlin with a retro review of WrestleMania 6 from the Toronto Skydome. Title for title, Hogan versus Warrior. It was the first time the Intercontinental Championship had been in the main event, and how did this pay-per-view age, you may be asking? Honestly, not nearly as bad as WrestleMania 1. Now, to be fair, WrestleMania 1 actually was fun. It's a good time capsule of, that time period for WWE. And this was sort of the apex of, big, stadium shows for WWE for a few years. Yes, WrestleMania 8 would be in Indiana, and it would get a respectable 45 something thousand people, and then would be papered to get a few more, but they wouldn't do a show of this scale, like this crowd size, until, WrestleMania 17. That would be the next stadium show that they would do. Because they would have, big crowds, and, they would grow their brand after the 90s, the early to mid 90s issues where they had to, go down on smaller venues. But this kind of represented an apex and a turning point and everything for WWE, because they went with a different champion and a different guy, and it didn't end up working out at all. However, how was the rest of the show? Well, you had Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura on commentary. Robert Goulet, the late great Robert Goulet, singing the Canadian national anthem. If you've never seen the Naked Gun movies, particularly, I believe he was in the second one, if I recall correctly. It was the second or third one. I think it was the second one, but he was great in that movie that he was in. Some of the villains blend together, when it comes to those movies, but they're all great. But, great to have Robert Goulet there. And, you keep Goulet away with Emerald Nuts. If you get that reference, you know a lot more ads than most people. So, we start off with Coco Beware versus Rick Martel. I got a question. How did Coco Beware get Frankie the Parrot through customs? These are the questions that must be answered. And it's Coco versus the man from Cocoa Beach, Florida. This wasn't that bad of a match. Rick Martel was getting into his heel persona more. He had turned heel on Tito Santana at the previous Mania, but it took a bit for the model gimmick to really get going. And he was really in his element at this point. Would only get better as he would have a really good run in the following Rumble, 52 minutes. And it certainly wasn't that bad. Coco would do a few moves, but in the end, it would be the Boston Crab that would get the victory for Rick Martel, and he would win to open up the show. We then get interviews with Demolition and the Colossal Connection, Haku and Andre. It was really sad to see Andre the Giant at this point totally beat up. I mean, to be fair, he loved wrestling, still wanted to do it, still did do it for a few years after this. Until just before his untimely death in January of 1993. But then we get the Colossal Connection versus Demolition WWF Tag Team Championship. Yes, it was still called the WWF at this time, so that's what I'm going to call it. This was notable for being Andre's last WrestleMania match. He would still wrestle on house shows, and then it would get to the point, mainly squashes, because he really wouldn't be doing all that much. His body was breaking down. He loved traveling, but, all the stuff I said before. Haku would carry most of this. Andre would get a few shots in, but eventually he would get tied up in the ropes, and then Axe and Smash would hit Total Demolition, or I think that's what they called their finishing move. I don't know if it was ever given a move, but they hit that. Pinned Haku, 1, 2, 3. Fun fact, Demolition won the Tag Team Championships at WrestleMania 4 over Strikeforce, over the Barbarian, Warlord, and Mr. Fuji in a handicap match at WrestleMania 5. So heels at 4, faces at 5, and then faces here at 6. And this would be pretty much the apex of Demolition at this point, because then they would lose the Tag Team Championships at SummerSlam 1990, and that would be right when Bill Eadie, Axe, would leave. He's still wrestling even to this day, I believe, unless he retired in the last year. But he needed to take a step back because he had a lot of injuries. He had wrestled a number of years before he became Axe, and they would bring Brian Adams, no, not the Canadian one, as Crush, but the team wouldn't really last. This was kind of cool, though, because the first time that a tag team would retain the tag team championships at WrestleMania would actually not be until WrestleMania 8, when the Natural Disasters would beat Champions Money Inc. by countout. And then Money Inc. would retain the championships by DQ, when Hogan and Brutus Beefcake didn't win them. So it actually was kind of funny that it took that long for the championships to stay, not switch hands, because they didn't switch hands at WrestleMania 3 when the Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation were supposed to have a match, but then Dynamite Kid did that one maneuver that, took away a lot of his life force. No, I'm not talking about the diving headbutt or the insane bumps or even the domestic violence that he did. Dynamite Kid deserves a burn in hell for being the piece of shit he was, no matter how innovative he was. No, I'm talking about him injuring his back, and then they had to do that 6-man tag. But anyway, back to this. Demolition wins. Bobby Heenan is in the corner of Haku and Andre. He slaps Andre eventually. He's berating him, slaps him. Andre slaps him. And, safely. As safe as a 7'4", 500-pound guy can. And then beats up Haku a little bit, shoves him off the cart, and leaves. And Heenan's all upset. And then he cuts a promo later. We then get Hercules versus Earthquake. Hercules in Mid-South was a whole lot better than this. This match wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. Earthquake hits the big one for 3. It was like a 4 or 5 minute match. And then that was pretty much it. And then Rhonda Barron, or I didn't fully catch her name. The audio was a little bit weird, and I have no idea who she is. But she interviews Mrs. Elizabeth. They always talked about Elizabeth's beauty. Fitting. She was my first wrestling crush. The first crush of a lot of guys around my age, I imagine. I mean, I am 39, in case you guys didn't know. But it was cool. She was talking about taking a back seat, that her fans wanted to see her on TV more. When the time was right, she would want to be there. She just didn't want to disappoint her fans. Honestly, love Miss Elizabeth. It's just a shame how her life ended. Thank you, Lex Luger, you piece of shit. So, Brutus Beefcake versus Mr. Perfect with the Genius. The Genius and Pat Patterson have something in common. No, I don't mean that. I mean how they allegedly abuse people backstage. And they're both pieces of shit for it. We all know the stories. Read up on the stories if you don't. But anyway, Brutus Beefcake was not good in the ring. He just wasn't. He really wasn't. Like, I mean, the gimmick was over with fans, for kids especially. I mean, at the time, I sort of liked him. It is a good thing that he recovered from that parasailing accident, because he actually was supposed to get a pretty big run, because he beat Mr. Perfect, who had an undefeated streak that totally wasn't an undefeated streak, because he was losing on house shows all the time to, like, Ultimate Warrior and others. But how Beefcake beat him was there was a post spot after some interference from the Genius with his scroll, getting his big hard object that, to Mr. Perfect, so the Genius could watch it be stroked into the back of Beefcake's head or right into his face. This analysis is getting away from me. The whole point is Mr. Perfect went into the post, safely, thankfully, because that would have hurt. 1, 2, 3, Beefcake beats him, handing Mr. Perfect his first loss in WWE. That wasn't even close to his first loss, but I digress. And then he puts a sleeper on the Genius and cuts his hair, because this is all going back to, like, the Royal Rumble 1990, where Beefcake had messed with the Genius and Mr. Perfect, and Mr. Perfect had stopped Beefcake from cutting the Genius's hair. And to be honest, Lanny Poffo pretty much deserved this treatment, because he wasn't all that good either. He was impressive athletically, and that was it. We then get Roddy Piper cutting a promo, half black, half white. Oh dear. I love Roddy Piper, but this was a bad idea. This was a really bad idea. He may have been talking about trying to bring all colors together. Bad. This was a bad idea, especially looking back on it. But even at the time, there were people like, what? What in the world? This just wasn't a good idea at all. And also because he was facing Bad News Brown, who, by the way, was a man of color, in case people forgot. And it's Bad News Shot Knees Brown. No, I'm not saying that because he's black. I'm not saying that. How dare anybody accuse me of saying stuff like that? You're accusing me of it. I run a clean show here. Anyway, match wasn't good. It wasn't. No, it wasn't. This would end. And the sad thing is, the Bad News was injured by this point, but still a pretty dominant force. And then Roddy Piper, the whole half black, half white thing did not help. They brawled some. It would eventually be like a double count, a double DQ thing. There's no reason why this feud ever happened. And I mean, the promos were fine, but it's like, it kind of reminded me like of a bit of a better worked version of the Papa Shango Ultimate Warrior feud that would come a couple years later. Yeah, that wasn't good. Steve Allen is cutting a promo while playing a piano, while in the showers of the locker room. And the Bolsheviks were there. And Steve Allen, if you don't know, look up a lot of his videos. He's a pretty good comedian. Much more old school comedian. He was offensive, but also had a dry wit. He was able to slide in zingers that sounded a lot less dirty in my head until I said it, but I'm on a roll with it. He was just mocking the Bolsheviks and doing some stuff and everything. Watch this. This is pretty funny. We then get the Hart Foundation versus the Bolsheviks. And this match lasted 19 seconds. I'm envious of anyone that can last 19 seconds. I'll just zing myself. I mean, nobody else is going to. So, yeah, there we go. Hart Foundation win easily. Bret Hart showing some personality here, by the way, because after they had interrupted the Russian national anthem, they hit Boris Zukov with the heart attack. And then Bret's like, it's like 1, 2, 3. And then, hi, I can do numbers correctly. But he does it. The way he's holding them, it almost looks like he's holding 3. But then he points at the camera for 2, 3. That was pretty cool. And then people say Bret Hart didn't have a personality. They do the Mania 7 ad, and Vince talks about taking it to the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. About that. Even if the whole thing with Slaughter and Hogan hadn't been as offensive as it was, there's no way they would have filled up the LA Coliseum. You know why? There's 100-something thousand. Vince was crazy. Because he probably thought he could put, a few more thousand than the 93,178 in the Pontiac Silverdome. It was more like 78,000. But whatever. WWE's never inflated numbers. This review's getting away from me. The Barbarian versus Tito Santana. Ventura had just slightly racist comments towards Tito Santana. Just slightly. Completely. But whatever. Heenan would make stuff like that too. And Monsoon noticed how very thick the Barbarian was. It is weird to hear commentary from back then. Tito hit some good moves, but in the end, it was a decapitation clothesline where Barbarian would hit off the top 1, 2, 3. We then get Randy Savage and Sensational Sherry versus Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire with Miss Elizabeth there. And this was messy. It was a lot of comedy. It's weird how Savage went from the main event in the WWF Championship to a mixed tag match. And this is Dusty Rhodes' only WWE, one of his only pay-per-view matches, but his only WrestleMania match. And that's kind of funny. Actually, he did have other pay-per-view matches before he left in end of January, beginning of February 91. It was messy. Elizabeth does interfere, attacks Sherry, and Sapphire hits the most devastating maneuver in all of wrestling, the surprise roll-up, 1, 2, 3. Well, Sherry, hope you enjoyed your WrestleMania match. That was about it. To be fair, Sherry by this point had wrestled enough years, and this was mainly just her doing what she could do to work with Sapphire. And then the faces celebrate. Good stuff. And then weird how Miss Elizabeth and Randy Savage would reunite a year later, which I'm not going to talk about because it was a totally not emotional moment. Except everybody in the crowd was crying, everybody watching pay-per-view, and people still cry right now. Anyway, Bobby Heenan is backstage with Mean Gene Okerlund, and Mean Gene talking about how he nobody can get along with him. And Heenan says, I'm the easiest man in the world to get along with. I miss Bobby Heenan so much. He says, you listen to me, you go to the top. You don't listen to me, you're never heard from again. This is where that famous line came. And then Randy Savage is yelling backstage with Sensational Sherry while Sean Mooney, who, cue Bobby Heenan, is talking. And Savage says, it goes to the payphone that just happens to be in the locker room. I mean, it was before cell phones, obviously. Picks up the phone, you better pick up the phone and call somebody. Because Randy Savage can make anything work. And then they're talking and everything, and then they run off. And then we get Hogan and Warrior yelling in their respective promos. Why were they always yelling? How much coke or how many roids were they on? Good God. And then it sounded like Warrior wanted to cock the Hulk Hogan. Hogan. Warrior could never grasp the English language at all. Anyway, Orient Express versus the Rockers. They would have a better match at the 1991 Rumble. This was like 7.5 minutes. It was condensed. It wasn't bad. But Mario Jannetty, we had salt in the eyes, and then he couldn't get back in the ring. He went over the guardrail and got counted out. That was about it. We didn't get Steve Allen. It seems like I'm running through some of these. It's not that these matches are bad. There just isn't really anything to write home about. Steve Allen with Rhythm and Blues, which is Honky Tonk Man, one of the worst Intercontinental Champions of all time. Not the best, one of the worst. 15 months as champion is a goddamn joke. And Greg the Hammer Valentine, noted massive sexist Greg the Hammer Valentine. This is coming from me, who makes jokes about everybody. Greg Valentine, boy, he doesn't like women's wrestling at all. Steve Allen says this line, and this is kind of timely due to the fact that at this time he was embroiled in a bit of a controversy, or it comes soon after, and I'm talking about the celebrity he would refer. He says, well, I haven't been this excited since I found out Pee Wee Herman was straight. Let me tell you, I didn't know I could like almost shoot that much like drink out my nose. I was like drinking a sparkling ice, and I nearly shot out my nose. I actually had to take like a few minutes to recover. It's like, oh my, I don't know why this is funny because it seems so tame by today's standards, but just if you know about Pee Wee Herman and what led to Pee Wee's Playhouse being canceled, Paul Rubin, all that stuff that happened. It wasn't anything bad, but it's what happened. It would kind of lead to him being shamed for something I'm sure a lot of other celebrities did, and they just didn't get caught for it. But anyway, that was a funny line. We then get Dino Bravo. Man, he got his shot in the Skydome. Why do I insist on being offensive? Speaking of offensive, Jim Duggan, he took him on, and he was waving the U.S. flag. The Skydome was in Toronto, which is in Canada, for those that don't know geography. Now, it's not that Canada and the U.S. don't have a bad relationship, well, except maybe now, because things are run a little bit better up there than they are here. But I digress. This was a bad move. He's waving the U.S. flag in Canada, and he was getting booed. And by the way, Dino Bravo, pretty over there. Now, yes, Montreal. I believe that was the next province over. I'm sorry if I got anything wrong. As far as provinces, I tend to screw some of that up because I don't know all my Canadian geography, but I know they're close. And so Dino Bravo was kind of getting cheered a little bit. And Duggan got some cheers, but a lot of people were like, you dumb son of a bitch, we're not in the U.S. What the hell are you doing? So, yeah, Earthquake was at ringside, and he would kind of distract the referee accidentally. In the 2x4, Duggan would would swing his lumber, his massive wood, all over Dino's back, and then would pin him. And then we would get the Earthquake hitting 3 big ones. The Earthquake. It's like the Ryback. So we then get Jake Roberts versus Ted DiBiase, $1 million championship match. Jake Roberts stole it. Noted piss drinker, by the way, in case you don't have. I kid. This, actually, I don't. It wasn't bad. It was decently wrestled. This had been a feud that had been building up for a number of months. Jake Roberts said in a pre-match promo he wanted to make Ted DiBiase beg for all the times that he took away stuff from the fans or he humiliated the fans. He wanted to make him beg for his championship. And so the fans did the wave during this. Crowds are ruining wrestling or whatever, I hear now. Okay, what do you say about this? Now, whatever. The fans at this point, this was a bit of a long show. Because they had a dark match. And I imagine that they had a bit of a setup before that. This was a 3.5 hour show, 3 hours, 35 minutes on the network. So you include the dark match, I imagine that we are probably closer to 4 hours. So the fans by this point may have been getting tired, even though they were excited. And also, they'd seen 10 matches already. Technically 11 matches, because it was actually 15 matches on the card, if you include the dark match. I don't in my results, but I digress. They were doing the waves during this. And then we get a count out because they both went into the post with the $1 million dream attempt. But Jake Roberts couldn't get back in the ring. Ted DiBiase wins by count out, takes the championship. And then Virgil steals the belt, which I'm sure had no symbolism at all. And then DDT to Ted DiBiase, and there's some money. And Jake is handing it to the crowd, and then takes a bill and stuffs it in DiBiase's mouth like DiBiase had done to so many of his opponents. So cool. All right. We then get we get Slick and Akeem. Akeem, the African Dream, is totally not a dig at Dusty Rhodes. And then you have Slick, the only vaguely offensive pimp preacher character. I really don't understand how they got away with this stuff. Maybe it's because we didn't care. Slick, though, pretty damn good talker. His theme's goddamn great. Bossman talks about how he won't take money from Ted DiBiase, which doesn't tie into anything that happened. Oh, Ted DiBiase attacks Bossman during his entrance. Then Akeem's all happy, lays him out. Akeem, by the way, the one-man gang, a much better gimmick. He would dominate for a little bit, but then out of nowhere, hard time slam, 1, 2, 3. This would be one-man gang's last match for WWE until the gimmick battle royal. He would wrestle as the one-man gang in WCW off and on Independence and stuff like that. Even as recently, I think it's 95, 96. So we get that. We get Sean Mooney talking to people, including Mary Tyler Moore. Okay, talking about stuff. And then we get Rhythm and Blues. Yeah, I don't like Greg Valentine. I hate Honky Tonk Man. It was cool to see Jimmy Hart there. And the pink Cadillac was driven by DDP, who would later appear in the Skydome 12 years later to wrestle. So it was kind of cool. He got to wrestle in the same venue. And they're performing, well, not DDP, but Rhythm and Blues are performing their number and everything. And the Bushwhackers thankfully saved this. Bushwhackers didn't save a lot of stuff, but they saved this segment. Smash the guitars, and that was that. Jimmy Snuka, noted murderer Jimmy Snuka, probably took the stairs to get to the venue and to, take out some women, versus Rick Rude. And Steve Allen joins commentary for this, tell you how ugly he is, referring to Snuka. He's not wrong. At one time, a vampire flew into his bedroom, took one look, and bit the bedpost. I need to see more Steve Allen stuff because I forgot just how hilarious he is. So, okay, Rude Awakening for 3. There wasn't much of a match. We then get Warrior running to the ring, Hogan taking the cart that took everybody to the ring, and Hogan versus Warrior title for title. I'm not going to get too into this. You can check out what I did as far as a retro review of Hogan versus Warrior at WrestleMania 6, the build to that and everything. This match, the crowd was split. It was the Intercontinental Championship and the WWF Championship, and it was pretty good. All things considered, you had noted homophobe and noted racist against each other. Yeah, and then you had that weird spot where they were doing the tests of strength and everything, and I put a 2-minute video on my Twitter where it's just like, wrestling is weird sometimes, is all I'm going to say. There was some stalling, but they had the crowd split. They had the crowd interested. Hogan goes for the leg drop, misses it. Warrior hits a splash. 1, 2, 3. Hogan kicks out like 3 1/4. He barely let Warrior have that. And then took the title, handed it to Warrior just to make sure that everybody knew that it had to be about Hogan. And then Warrior got to celebrate with the pyro and everything, but Hogan got to look, and he just wasn't very happy. To be fair, it should have actually been Hogan that Vince kept going with, but Hogan kind of wanted to go by the wayside. Vince tried going with Warrior. It didn't work. But I will say that overall, this show served its purpose and, again, was an apex for WrestleMania. Because they would go down to smaller venues, especially by Mania 7. They would go from the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum all the way down to the was it Staples Center? No, maybe what would become Staples Center. I don't remember the venue exactly, but anyway, they would go on a huge downgrade. The whole point is this was still a fun Mania, did flow by, and you had Steve Allen stealing the show as far as a celebrity. So anyway, agree, disagree, what I said. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.